Good evening and welcome. I'm Michael Gately, Executive Director of Biographers International Organization. We'll begin momentarily as people join from the Eventbrite link in the Zoom waiting room. To limit background noise, please be sure to keep your microphone audio set to mute, which is at the bottom left corner of your computer screen. Please set your screen view, which is in the top right corner, to speaker view. And feel free to keep your own video camera on. If we were gathering in person, this event would be following a cocktail reception. So please feel free to get a glass of something so that we may toast the honoree during the evening. It's great to see so many friendly faces joining us from around the world. And it's my pleasure now to turn to Linda Level, President of Bio, to introduce the event. Linda?
Welcome, everybody. This is Bio's 7th Editorial Excellence Award. I am Linda Level, the President of Biographers International Organization, which we call Bio. Bio members are well aware that publishing a book is a collaborative effort among many professionals. And we like to acknowledge that with an award to an outstanding editor who helps good biographies get published. The award was established 7 years ago at the instigation of past President Will Swift, and the recipient is chosen each year by a committee of esteemed biographers. Kai Bird chaired the committee for the 2020 award. Tim Dugan, Peniel Joseph, Kitty Kelly, and Megan Marshall formed the rest of the committee. I'd like to thank them for their excellent work and also thank Michael Gately, who has done a great job organizing tonight's event. Some of you are very familiar with Bio, the organization, but in case you're not, Bio is an organization for biographers and readers of biography. It aims to promote the art and craft of biography, cultivate a diverse community of biographers, encourage public interest in biography, and provide educational and fellowship opportunities that support the work of biographers worldwide. Tonight's event is free and open to the public. If you are not a member of Bio already and would like to join, I've put the link for joining Bio in the chat feature. And if you would like to make a donation to Bio, we're always happy to accept donations. And I've put a link to our donation page in the chat space as well. Next, I'd like to introduce Tim Dugan, who was the 2018 recipient of the Editorial Excellence Award. He serves on Bio's advisory committee. He was a member of the committee that selected tonight's recipient, and he has been a friend to Bio for many years. Tim will introduce Gayatri Patnaik, winner of the 2020 Editorial Excellence Award. Tim?
So I'm on the advisory council and the award committee of Bio, and it's an honor for me to introduce tonight this year's winner of our Editorial Excellence Award. Gayatri Patnaik is the Associate Director and Editorial Director of Beacon Press, where she has put together one of the most formidable, progressive, groundbreaking lists of books from any publisher anywhere. And it's fair to say that my admiration for her books and the way she publishes them is mixed with a little bit of envy. While every trade publisher in New York is now scrambling to find forward-looking books on race and gender and immigration, Gayatri beat them to the punch by about 18 years, which is how long she's been doing this at Beacon up in Boston. Gayatri was born and educated in India and spent many years growing up in the US in rural Maryland. She also comes from a family of writers. Her grandmother, who helped raise her, wrote 20 books in both English and Hindi, not to mention her aunt, uncles, and cousin, all of whom are accomplished authors. After getting her master's in anthropology at the New School, she worked at Morrow, Random House, Routledge, and Palgrave, where she became a senior editor. But joining Beacon is what allowed her to find her true calling and to flourish, first as an editor and then as an editorial director, helping to lead and shape the overall list. She had the imagination and the initiative to launch Beacon's award-winning Revisioning American History series, which reinterprets US history from the point of view of underrepresented communities. An Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz is one of the first books that exemplified the series and showed how far it could reach. She also helped to start the Queer Action, Queer Ideas series and has published books in the King Legacy, which is Beacon's series in partnership with the Martin Luther King Jr. estate. In addition to the authors who were speaking tonight, she has also edited and worked with Cornel West, Kate Bornstein, and Mary Frances Berry. Gayatri's commitment to her authors and to the values of social justice and independent publishing have made her an editor of tremendous integrity and extraordinary achievement. She is a trailblazing talent who is not only respected, but genuinely adored by her literary community. So this honor couldn't be more well-deserved. So tonight, before hearing from her, we're going to hear from 3 of her authors and the literary agent, who are some of her closest publishing partners. Jeanne Theoharis, Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Brooklyn College, is the author of The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. Imani Perry, Hughes Rogers Professor of African American Studies at Princeton, is the author of Looking for Lorraine, The Radical Life of Lorraine Hansberry. Marcus Rediker, Distinguished Professor of History at the University of Pittsburgh, is the author of numerous books, including The Fearless Benjamin Lay. And Tanya McKinnon, founder and principal of McKinnon Literary, represents New York Times bestselling and award-winning nonfiction that amplifies progressive voices, as well as fiction, children's books, and graphic novels. So to start, I'm going to turn it over now to Jeanne Theoharis.
Thank you, and it's such an honor to be here celebrating Gayatri. So I wanted to use my time tonight to talk about 3 of my favorite qualities about Gayatri, and particularly about Gayatri as an editor and as sort of an intellectual friend. The first is her willingness to have skin in the game. One of my favorite memories of Gayatri actually comes from probably the hardest point of our professional relationship. I had turned in the draft for the Rosa Parks biography, which had come in nearly 40,000 words over the contract limit. Given all the incredible detail I'd found on Mrs. Parks, given that one of the central arguments of the book was that she was worthy of the kind of capacious biography that Eleanor Roosevelt, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln had been given, and given that Manning Marable had just successfully published an even huger book on Malcolm X, I was confident that Beacon was going to be willing to be sort of generous. They were not. In fact, only willing to give me 10,000 more words, which meant in the last basically 5 months before the book was due, I was going to have to cut nearly 30,000 words, which was an extraordinary set of cuts after 5 years of research. Now, Gayatri understood that this was not merely a literary question, but a political one, because surely Rosa Parks merited a long book, a capacious book, again, like King, Malcolm X, Eleanor Roosevelt had been afforded. She offered to let me out of the contract if this was something that I felt would do violence to the book. And so I thought about it for a week or 2. And I decided that I felt like she believed in the book and Beacon believed in the book, and I wanted to stay with them. And then she set to work. She wasn't going to make me have to do this by myself. And so with her expert tiny chisel, she went sentence by sentence, painstakingly removing word by word so that I wouldn't have to cut out any section, obviously I had to cut out some meat, but not, again, when you think about what 30,000 words is, she was sort of committed to get through the whole book. And both that taught me how to use the tiny chisel, a skill that I feel like I'm much better at because of that experience. But also I feel like that political understanding, along with, again, that solidarity, that skin in the game, embodies, I think, one of the qualities I most admire about her. The second is her ability to both lead and change course. When Beacon contracted my Rosa Parks book, I had done some preliminary research. So we had some sense of sort of how much bigger the story was, particularly outside of the South and in terms of Mrs. Parks' kind of Black Power years. But I had not done the bulk of the archival work. I hadn't done the bulk of the oral histories. And they refused to put photos in the contract, I think because it was too expensive. So again, when Gayatri actually read a full draft of the manuscript years later, something changed. We didn't talk about it. She didn't belabor it. I don't know what she did. But she came back to me and said, we were gonna have photos in the book. And because this was sort of the 11th hour, she put her assistant, the wonderful Rachel Marx, on the task, who did all of the 11th hour work to get the permissions to make it possible to have the sleeve of photos that appear in the book. Certainly a decision that made the book even richer. But she just did it, right? I don't know how she did it. I don't know how they changed course on it, but it happened. And finally, I think just the way she is an intellectual sort of comrade and companion. In Beloved, Toni Morrison describes one form of love as the ability to be a friend of my mind. And that is, I think, the final aspect of how Gayatri works as an editor. She delights in ideas, in helping me, and I think, as we're going to hear from other people, on the journey. She relishes the urgency of the intervention. I remember at some point at the beginning of A More Beautiful and Terrible History, I had just gotten off the phone with her and I was talking to my best friend, Alex Marchevsky, who's also a professor and a writer. And I was telling her how excited Gayatri was about the book and about the urgency of having it in the world. How lucky to have an editor like that, Alex said. How lucky indeed. Thank you.
Okay, first I want to thank Bio for the opportunity to celebrate the wonderful Gayatri. Before I talk about her as an editor, I want to begin with her as a person. You know, I think of myself, hopefully this is true, as someone who is kind and generous, but not necessarily friendly, in that I'm skeptical, I look for people's angles and intentions. And I say that because from my very first meeting of Gayatri, it was clear to me that she's a kind and principled person of absolute integrity. There are people who are excellent at what they do. There are special people who are both excellent human beings and excellent at what they do. And that's Gayatri. In terms of the editorial relationship, one of the things I most appreciated was that she allowed me to write in an experimental form and understood why that was important, why it was important to be able to delve into Hansberry's interior life, to understand the thread between her works, to understand her as a creative intellectual, someone who's grappled with loneliness, who was hungry for life, who dealt with depression, and most of all, to understand that writing a biography of someone like her was as much about telling her story as about using her story as part of the usable past for the present. And I say that because I honestly can't imagine another editor allowing me to have done that. And especially because I was wholly unproven as a creative writer. I hadn't written in that form before at all. And she gave me space to prove myself. At the level of detail, her editorial comments were always an invitation, an occasion for dialogue. So, you know, the marginalia, unclear, is not one that she gave me, right? It wasn't, instead it was, what do you think made this moment so profound? Where are you going with this? Why is this significant? A nurturing process for creation. And I think perhaps the greatest evidence of this is that both in the three of us who are speaking tonight, but there are a number of people who I've seen who are on this call, whose books I have read. Everyone has a quite distinct book, right? With very clear voices as writers and thinkers. And when you see that, I think from working with an editor, it becomes clear there's nothing formulaic, right, that's being imposed upon. It really is an effort to allow each person to emerge fully as a writer, a thinker. And I also would add, I think that with respect to the biography that Gayatri has edited, she has compelled all of us, and I've read a bunch of them, and I think they're all fantastic. She's compelled us to write them in a way that they will live beyond the short-term life cycle. And for really popular subjects, popular figures, that's not necessarily the imperative for every sort of editorial direction, right? It can be like, we want this to be the big book for this year. These are contemplative works that have a lifespan because they have layers and depth to them. And that's certainly a product of the nurturing that we all receive. And the last thing I will say is that to do all of that while also serving as a leader at the press, I think is really remarkable. And one witnesses that in the editorial process, because what's really wonderful at Beacon is you meet everybody in the process. And you can see all the parties in operation, but also the kind of extraordinary management of human beings and human personality that Gayatri does. And to both tend to that, to the community, and also to the minutiae of the birth and growth of ideas and stories is really quite a beautiful thing. So thank you so much, Gayatri.
Thank you, Imani.
I'd like to begin by thanking Gayatri for inviting me to be here. Thanks to Michael for organizing this. I'd like to begin with an old and provocative saying, which goes like this: the relationship between editor and writer is the relationship between knife and throat. Now, I want to use the example of my friend and editor, Gayatri Patnaik, to prove that this is not always true. Now, I've done 3 books with Gayatri, 4 books with Beacon Press. She is highly intelligent. She is endlessly helpful, and she has been hugely insightful about everything I have written. I assume this is the case with all of her authors. It has also been my experience that in almost everything she said about all of the manuscripts that we've worked on, she turns out to be right. And that is a somewhat maddening feature of her work as an editor. No matter how much I may have resisted things at the beginning, it turns out she was right. So let me add another quality. She's very persuasive, and that matters. Another thing that I admire tremendously about Gayatri is that she perfectly embodies the great progressive traditions of Beacon Press. Tim mentioned this at the outset. Beacon Press for many decades has shown a commitment to telling the stories of movements that have changed the world, and an equally strong commitment to find and bring back the voices, bring back to life the voices of people who have been lost to history. Just think about the authors Beacon Press has published. I was thinking this morning, what were the first Beacon books I bought? I'm pretty sure it was James Baldwin and Herbert Barcusa, but also might have been Mary Daly. It might have been Howard Zinn. So this is really truly a great tradition. And of course, there is now the collected works of Martin Luther King Jr., a project in which Gayatri has played a leading role within a very complex diplomacy, I might add. So Beacon is a people's press. richly committed to history from below. And I must admit, it has always meant a lot to me that Beacon is one of the very few trade presses that is not owned by an evil multinational corporation. So Gayatri is an expression of that too. Now, a few years ago, I went to Gayatri to propose a most unusual biography. I wanted to write about a man named Benjamin Lay, who was a Quaker and an abolitionist and a dwarf and a hunchback. And I don't think anyone here, except for maybe Gayatri and myself, has ever actually heard of him. But Lay was one of the first people to call for a worldwide abolition of slavery. He was a vegan 2 centuries before the word was invented. He believed in the equality of men and women. He wrote that we must beware of rich men who poison the earth for gain. Now, he wrote that in 1738, but it sounds to me like it was written yesterday. He performed guerrilla theater, in which he spattered slave owners with red berry juice or symbolic blood. He lived in a cave. He made his own clothes and grew his own food. So I was proposing to Gayatri a very unusual man. And what you have to remember is that nobody had ever heard of him. This is not Rosa Parks. This is not Lorraine Hansberry. This is someone who's really completely unknown. The prevailing view of Benjamin Lay at that time, as summarized by probably the leading historian of abolition, was that he was, quote, a demented little hunchback, end quote. And I hope those words make you cringe. But Gayatri not only encouraged me in this project, she signed up the book with great and unwavering enthusiasm. And I would dare say that she went even further. I think she actually fell in love with Benjamin Lay, at least a little bit. So not long after we had made this deal, Gayatri did something that I had never known an editor to do. She invited me to give a talk about Benjamin Lay to the entire staff of Beacon Press. And we did, and we had a kind of glorious good time. But later, it dawned on me what she was doing. This was an act of leadership. She wanted everybody in the press to get to know Benjamin Lay, to become enthusiastic about Benjamin Lay. And there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that she increased the commitment of the entire press to the success of the book through that action. One great moment in writing that book came when I found in a very small, obscure archive in Germantown, Pennsylvania, a book that had belonged to Benjamin Lay. He had a big library in that cave. And it was a kind of a marvel itself, this book. It was a set of sermons from a revolutionary of 17th century England. But even more marvelous was that Benjamin Lay had written marginal comments in his own hand. So we get to see what he thought about a wide range of subjects. One of his inscriptions read quite simply, "Dear friends, be tender-hearted." That's Gayatri. She is super smart. She is deeply knowledgeable about her trade, but without hard edges. She is a tender-hearted editor, which is to say, she is the very opposite of a knife. So it has been a great joy to work with you, Gayatri. Thank you and congratulations on this prestigious, well-deserved award.
Thank you, Margaret.
I'm very honored to have been asked to speak about Gayatri tonight. I can think of no more worthy person to be honored for her work in publishing. I met Gayatri in graduate school. She was a year ahead of me in our cultural anthropology program. We got to know each other through a mutual friend and hit it off immediately as two of the only women of color in our program. I liked Gayatri from the minute I met her. She was and is warm, thoughtful, funny, and kind. I remember that the three of us used to meet for a late afternoon cappuccinos at the deli across the street from the new school and complain about our workload, make fun of the intellectually pretentious men in our program, and slowly, over the course of my first and her second year, plot our escape from graduate school. It was that drive that we both had, to be connected to a life of the mind and ideas, yet not formally tethered to the academy, that occupied more and more of our thinking and time together. We called it the Great Escape, and I think almost all of our peers thought we were insane. But I want to make it clear that Gayatri didn't want to leave graduate school because it was beyond her. In fact, she had already received a fellowship for the PhD program. I can remember Talal Assad complaining one day after our class had turned in sort of mid-semester papers that none of us exhibited the drive and discipline of a student he had had the previous year. It was Gayatri. She had taken a basic assignment and gone above and beyond what was required, uncovering a little known fact about, I don't know, a battle in Papua New Guinea. I had to look down as he was speaking so that I wouldn't laugh, because I remember arriving at Gayatri's apartment one day a little bit early in the afternoon to find her still studying. When she opened the door, she was dressed in white from head to toe and wearing a white headband. And she looked at me and she said, "What? These are the clothes I study in." A little white clad intellectual ninja, okay? That's what she was. And a part of her exists in my mind this way to this day. Okay, but back to our great escape. Gayatri jumped first, leaving behind the security of a PhD program that was fully funded to hopefully land in New York publishing. And she did. And I watched her soar and gathered up my own courage to do the same a few months later. Gayatri landed a job as an assistant editor to a commercial publisher at a fancy new imprint at a commercial New York house. And I went on to become a literary scout. We were both learning a lot, but it also wasn't quite the liberation we had hoped for. After a year, Gayatri felt the strain of acquiring for profit. She was free from the excessive demands of graduate school, but now she was tethered to a corporate bottom line. So she moved to the academic publishers, first Routledge and then Palgrave. They were a better fit, and she was happier again. And one day, she got a call from Helen Atwan, who was and still is the director of Beacon Press. When she called me, she said, "Hey, Tanya, I've been offered a job at Beacon Press in Boston." I remember saying two things. One, the winters are really cold. And two, you'll get to work on books that are expressly about changing the world. As a Black woman, I had to point out the weather, but as a friend, I had to point out the obvious. Gayatri didn't take long to make up her mind. Within days, she knew it was the right move for her. I helped her pack. It was hard to see a good friend leave, especially one whom you can always count on to tell you the truth. I think anyone who knows Gayatri will know what I'm talking about. For instance, if you get a haircut, don't ask her what she thinks of it if you don't want to hear the truth. I can remember one time when I'd been studying for finals and I was eating a lot of fruits in the afternoon. And I turned to Gayatri and I said, "You know, I think I'm gaining weight." And she's like, "Oh no, you are." And I was like, okay. But I knew then what I know now. And that is that loving truthfulness is hard to come by. And I am very fortunate to have a close friend who prizes the truth above all else. And it's that dedication to the truth and admiration for brilliance that has made Gayatri the exceptional editor that she is. When I look at my bookshelf, I see the books that she has shepherded into the world, and they bear the mark of her editorial rigor, supportiveness, and intellectual trust. Gayatri is the kind of editor that smart writers dream about. She gives her writers free rein, but also knows how to pull them back to the point. And she always dreams with her writers about a better, more just, more equitable, and more inclusive world. I want to take a moment to just talk about a few of my favorite books that Gayatri's edited. You know, she's never one to wait for a manuscript to land on her desk. So hours after Trump was elected, when the rest of us were still weeping and crying into our morning coffee cups, instead of feeling helpless, Gayatri asked a critical question. Had progressive movements done well during conservative administrations? And if so, would a book about those successes bolster us precisely when we needed it most? That idea became History Teaches Us to Resist, How Progressive Movements Have Succeeded in Changing Times by her mentor, her longtime mentor, Mary Frances Berry. As a woman of color, Gayatri has thought a lot about the politics of color. She edited We Wear the Mask, 15 True Stories About Passing in America by Brando Skyhorse and Lisa Page, where we have compelling essays where contributors define passing beyond race into opportunity, access, and safety, areas that we don't normally think of when we use the term passing. When it comes to queer titles, she edited a favorite of mine, not least for its subtitle, by the gender theorist, performance artist, playwright, and actress Kate Bornstein. A Queer and Pleasant Danger, the true story of a nice Jewish boy who joins the Church of Scientology and leaves 12 years later to become the lovely lady she is today. Another one of my favorites, of course, which is part of her revisioning history series that she started at Beacon, is An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, which received the American Book Award. And of course, Biography, which has, Looking for Lorraine by my favorite Imani Perry, and a more beautiful and terrible history. So all of these books have been so meaningful for me. I also think all of these books bear the hallmark of a mind that is by turns serious, curious, funny, and wise about knowing what we as people need to live our best feminist, Black, Indigenous, person of color, progressive, LGBTQ+, and activist lives. Gayatri wants to make the world a better place. The world is a better place because Gayatri is editing books in it. Thank you, Gayatri, for everything that you have contributed to all of our intellectual lives. And with that, I'd like to turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and good evening, everyone. Tim, it was a thrill to be introduced by you. I want to thank the committee at Bio that chose to give this award to me. Peniel Joseph, Kitty Kelly, Megan Marshall, Kai Bird, and Tim Dugan. And a special thanks to Michael Gately, Bio's executive director, and to Linda Level, Bio's president. As some of you know, I'm part of that great and long-standing publishing tradition of being an introverted editor. So thank you also for pushing me out of my shell for a night. It's so special for me to have Jeanne, Imani, Marcus, and Tanya here. They've all expanded and influenced my thinking in profound ways and have such integrity. So thank you for being here and for your words. As you know, a publishing house's reputation is derived from its authors. So above all, much gratitude for trusting me and Beacon with your books. I wouldn't be an editor worth my salt if I didn't start by telling you why you should read their biographies. So let's begin there, with the author. But I'll first share that the thing about publishing biography, from my experience, is that in addition to believing there's an audience for it, you absolutely have to fall in love with it. And that can only happen when there's a compelling and vital vision that the authors bring. I still recall the first emails I received from Jeanne, Imani, and Marcus about their projects. Jeanne not only had encyclopedic knowledge about Rosa Parks, but an unwavering commitment to revealing her as the radical figure she was. Because as much as every American knows about Parks, she was, as Jeanne argued, truly hiding in plain sight. And Jeanne showed how the mythology about Parks obfuscated what was most riveting and true about her. I recognized this book could truly change how people thought of Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement. So my goal working with Jeanne on her political biography was to keep the intellectual rigor, but make it more accessible to general readers. And we worked closely together on that. It was a thrill when Charles Blow raved about the book in a New York Times article, noting that Jeanne proved that Parks was as much Malcolm X as she was Martin Luther King Jr. Beacon will be publishing a young adult version of this biography soon, and I'm overjoyed that a younger generation of readers will grow up understanding how inherently radical and rebellious she was. With Imani, I knew from the get-go that her biography of Lorraine Hansberry would require trust, in the sense that it wasn't going to be traditional, and that intrigued me. I remember Imani's proposal was short, but the vision was there, and again, I sensed this very deep pull and identification that Imani had for her subject. If Rosa Parks' life, as many people know it, was largely relegated to one event, the Montgomery bus boycott, many also only knew Hansberry for one reason, the success of her award-winning play, A Raisin in the Sun. And while that's covered in the book, the gift of looking for Lorraine, as a starred book list review pointed out, is that Imani didn't dwell on the minutiae of what, when, and where. She focused on who and why, and on Hansberry's writing and the inner drama. Imani sometimes entered the narrative, and in so doing, made us see and feel Hansberry. The intimacy Imani created was glorious, and it was that rich interiority in part that made me ask Imani if she might write a book for us about how she was raising her sons and how she was educating them. That book is called Breathe, and I hope you read it. And then there was Marx's biography of Benjamin Lay. When I first heard of Lay, he sounded like a fictional character. I mean, we're talking about an 18th century Quaker little person who was a fierce abolitionist, who opposed the death penalty, was vegan, who believed in animal rights and wouldn't even ride horses because he felt it oppressed animals, who, for part of his life, lived in a cave surrounded by 200 books. Then there was Lay's colorful and brilliant guerrilla theater in the Quaker Meeting House when he would shame Quaker slave masters. I joked to colleagues that Marx's wife had to be jealous because, Marcus, you were clearly besotted with Benjamin Lay and still are. And really, who wouldn't be? I should mention that the Quaker community actually changed Benjamin Lay's status, partly due to Marcus's book. The Quaker community had cast Lay out for his activism, but reinstated him as a friend just a few years ago. I'm happy to report that Beacon is publishing a graphic novel on Lay based on Marcus's book next year. These books all received the attention they deserved, won awards, and created positive change. The similarity all these authors had for their subject, in addition to great knowledge about them, which is essential, was passion, conviction, and vision. It was electric. I generally felt they each had a calling to write these books, and I had a calling to publish them. I did want to say a word about Tanya McKinnon, who has her own agency, McKinnon Literary, but who started out as an editor at South End Press, was a scout, and is an award-winning author in her own right. I feel lucky to have come up in publishing with Tanya, who is an exceptionally sharp and provocative thinker. And so it's not surprising she has a stellar client list, which includes Imani Perry, Michael Eric Dyson, Damon Young, Brittany Cooper, and so many others. Cutting against the grain is a perspective that I think I share with our panelists, and I'm sure it brought us together. It's been called a, quote, bottom-up perspective, and is really a commitment to publishing non-mainstream viewpoints, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, immigrants and those from the LGBTQIA, as well as the disability community, to mention just a few categories. I think of the books that I've had the privilege to edit as my fingerprint. They reveal my belief system and what my commitments are. My interest in issues of race, ethnicity, and social justice is clear in the books I've published, and a palpable thread in my career. And I imagine it's largely a response to my experiences in the US. I came here when I was about 7 years old and joined my mother and older brother, who were already here, in a very small town in Western Maryland called Finsville, with a population of around 500. And to give a little context, before that, I'd been living with my grandmother in India. So when I came to Maryland, it felt a bit like going to the moon. Everything was strange. The language, the food, experiencing snow, seeing white people. And for those early years there, my brother and I didn't see anyone who looked like us. And many of the people in that community assumed we were a different race or ethnicity, not South Asian. We were clearly marked as other. I've realized that this experience of being an outsider has profoundly and helpfully influenced me as an editor. One of the ways I think that people suffer is not seeing themselves reflected or represented. And so the greatest joy in my career is to be able to amplify voices from historically marginalized communities. And I have to say that on those occasions where I've seen people pick up a book I've edited, and I can tell from their expression that they're excited and just feeling validated in who they are, that there's truly no better feeling for me than that. My publishing journey started after I got my master's in cultural anthropology at the New School for Social Research in New York. I had just completed my thesis, which was about how the actions of the Indian government actually resulted in perpetuating the AIDS pandemic there. And I was in New Delhi doing research and happened to spend some time with my aunt and uncle, Geeta and Sunny Mehta. Many of you know that Sunny was an incredible publisher and the head of Knopf for many years, and he passed away on December 31st of last year. Sunny saw my ambivalence about pursuing a PhD and suggested I try an internship in book publishing, which I did at Random House. I should mention that before I got into publishing, I thought of Sunny as an interesting uncle with whom you had these intense conversations in smoke-filled rooms. And of course, I love getting all the free Knopf books. But I wasn't aware of his profile in the industry until I got into it myself. I remember a conversation I had with Sunny shortly after deciding to pursue publishing. We were alone, and I was ready to hear the wisdom of the great Sunny Mehta about being an editor. So I asked him, how do you edit? This question was met with silence, but there were always long silences with Sunny, and that's just how it was. Still, it was a longer silence than most, and I was beginning to worry it was just a stupid question and that he wasn't even going to respond. But he finally spoke and said in that soft voice, I use a pencil. Unfortunately for me, this was followed by another torturous pause. But he continued, saying, I go through the manuscript once, just reading it over, and then I go through again, suggesting some edits. And then he concluded, and the thing is, you never know if you got it right. That was it. I can still remember thinking to myself, not very helpful, Sunny. But of course, as I realized later, you can't tell someone how to edit. You learn it through doing it. And you learn it by committing to the process and loving books and loving authors and ideas. What Sunny modeled for me and for so many others was what absolute commitment to the author looks like. I think he was the ultimate invisible hand behind a book and both a sounding board and a visionary. Sunny was a kind of through line for me for 3 decades, and I'm sorry he isn't here today for so many reasons. I miss his presence, the intimacy he created by being such a deep listener, and I miss his silences. After the Random House internship, I worked in publishing in New York in different houses where I had wonderful colleagues. I worked at Rob Weisbach Books, Routledge, and Palgrave. But it wasn't until I joined Beacon Press that I found my publishing sweet spot, because it turned out that what I would end up loving was what we at Beacon call the crossover book, which is to say, an intellectually rigorous book with great appeal. As authors and agents who work with us know, Beacon is known for many things, but generally not large advances. The silver lining there is that we need to be nimble and creative in terms of developing projects. And one of the initiatives you've heard about tonight that I'm especially proud of is our Revisioning History series. Each book in the series changes the frame of US history by telling it from the vantage point of a different historically marginalized community. We have 9 books in the series and have published 5 so far, including Michael Bronski's A Queer History of the United States, Kim Nielsen's A Disability History of the US, and Callie Gross and Dinah Berry's A Black Women's History of the United States. These books have been embraced by trade, academic, and activist readers. And the impact of seeing yourself written into history and as an active participant matters. We've adapted, or will be adapting, all these titles for young adult readers as well, so they can grapple with the complexities and truth of US history at a much younger age. For months now in publishing, we've seen a commitment to lifting up Black voices and those of people of color. And it's heartening to be in this moment when houses are taking seriously the mandate to publish more diverse authors and have a more diverse staff. In addition to needing more Black, Indigenous, and people of color in all aspects of the industry, higher salaries are necessary. And it's been exciting to see a number of houses, including Beacon, commit to higher entry and mid-level salaries so that those without generational wealth can enter the industry. It does feel like a watershed moment to me, filled with tremendous opportunities. A time to rethink who gets chosen, who gets a seat at the table, who we reward, and why. Of course, organizations that support writing and writers matter tremendously. I'm so grateful that Bio exists and for the crucial role you play. And I trust you're evolving and having important conversations of your own. The importance of biography in this moment of reckoning can't be overstated. This includes discussions on who is seen as deserving of a biography, and publishing neglected lives and voices profoundly matter. I think it's an exciting time for more non-traditional biographies as well, such as Eddie Glaude's Begin Again, which I imagine many of you have read. His book on James Baldwin weaves biography with literary and social criticism and a bit of memoir too, and is so thought-provoking and relevant. It has been such a tumultuous, unsettling, and painful year for all of us. And the real gift of this award is that it made me stop and reflect on this profession that I'm so fortunate to be part of. I'm grateful to Beacon Press, which has been my publishing home for 18 years. And I don't know if I'd call myself a gutsy and courageous editor, as Bio kindly called me, but I know for sure that I work at a gutsy and courageous house, which has been at the forefront of many social justice movements from the beginning, from before they were in and from before they were profitable. I stayed at Beacon all these years for the books, but also for the people. And I continue to learn so much from our staff, and of course, from our authors. I've been thinking about the exposure I've had to books all my life. Both my parents are voracious readers, and my aunt, grandmother, and 2 uncles are published writers. And it was transformative to be in a family where there's so much commitment to the written word. I saw a cartoon somewhere recently which asked the question, is the journey more important, or is it the destination? And the answer was, it's the company. And it is the company. I realize I'm biased, but I have always thought that the best conversations are with people who work in some way with books, the writers, the booksellers, the sales force, and the readers. I feel so lucky to be on this journey with this community, all of you, especially in these times. So thank you for that, and thank you for tuning in. I will always remember this evening.
Thank you. That was a wonderful and inspiring talk, Gayatri. Thank you for that. Thank you also to the panelists for your warm candor and your insights into what it's like to work with a really fine editor. Thank you to all the people who are participating. And I would like to congratulate Gayatri one more time and have you lift your glass or applaud or whatever you like to do to conclude this evening.
Thanks.
So thank you, everybody, very, very much. Good night.
Thank you.